Hi, everyone. Every shadchan has heard some version of the question, are they compatible? I mean, what does that even mean? Does compatibility mean having the same personality, the same hobbies, the same politics, the same levels of introversion and extroversion? Modern psychology gives mixed answers. Yeah, similarity helps, complementarity helps. But when researchers look at what predicts long term flourishing relationships, one variable consistently outruns almost everything else. You know what it is? Do they share the same values and the same goals? Not are we alike, but rather, are we headed in the same direction? Because two people walking towards the same destination can survive very different walking styles. Two people walking towards different destinations cannot be saved by having identical personalities. Take the famous odd couple, Felix Unger, Oscar Madison. They were opposites in virtually every measurable way. One was neat, the other chaotic. One was anxious, the other carefree, and yet somehow they worked because underneath the differences, they were playing for the same team. So, how does one know whether he or she should seek a partner in whatever field or endeavor that's just like him or her? And when does one specifically seek a person with a different mindset and skill set? Frankly, how do you choose the right mate? That, I think, is exactly the question with which Chumash Bamidbar closes. You see, in the final chapter of the book of Bamidbar, we find the people struggling with what seems to be the same question. After all of the plans are determined and declared, after all the final battles already engaged, lands divided, and even cities of refuge established, a final issue remained unresolved. At the end of Parshas Maasei, we're going to read, Vayikrevu Rashi Ha'avos leMishpachas b'nei Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe mimishpachos b'nei Yosef. The heads of the family of Gilad ben Menashe stepped forward towards Moshe and the heads of the tribes. Why were they coming close? And to whom were they coming close? And with what mission and purpose did they come? So the Torah continues to describe how the members of this family express concern about the division of their ancestral lands with the inclusion of Benos Slavchad's daughters in the mix. You see, the family of Gilad was concerned that when these young women would marry, the lands they possess would wind up in the family of their husbands and children. And those families and tribes ultimately will diminish and split this family's portion in the land of Israel. And so they asked Moshe and Aaron and the leadership for help in order to preserve the integrity of the land and of its division. And here's where things get really odd in the coupling. Moshe actually encourages the young women to seek husbands from their own shevet. Now, from a simple reading of the text, it seems like the needs and the desires of these individual young women were going to be put on the side for the greater good. Is that really true? Moreover, the Torah tells us exactly what did happen. Kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe, kein asu benos slavchad. They just went ahead and followed the word of Hashem. Now, in truth, that's not exactly the order of the text. You see, first the Torah tells us they listened to Hashem, and then only thereafter, in the closing lines of the Chumash Bamidbar, we read that they married their cousins. Why does the Torah work out of order? Why not first tell us whom they married, and then tell us that they were following Hashem? Why the change? And if it's true that they married because of business, is that sensical? Is it proper? And what does it have to do with closeness, kirva, as well? To put it more bluntly, why does the Torah tell us that they obeyed Hashem before telling us whom they married? I think our answers might be found in a different coupling in this week's double parsha. This one quite the opposite of the named Benos Slavchad. It involves a different couple. The couple at the beginning of Parshas Matos. You see, the couple at the beginning of the parsha begin their marriage, and for some unidentified reason, become ensnared over nedarim and shvuos of promises and oaths. And the Torah recognizes that marriages are not only of grand ideals, but also sometimes of careless words, of frustration and disappointment. Nedarim, as a result, vows can become walls between people. And so, therefore, the Torah creates a mechanism not merely to resolve the neder, but to preserve the relationship itself. In these cases, the Torah has already created an opt-out measure of annulment called hafara to be applied by the husband to the neder. Think about that. The Torah places in the husband's hand this unusual power, the ability to remove the neder before it becomes a permanent wedge in the relationship. In fact, the Torah totally absolves the woman as it declares twice, "V'Hashem yislach la," that Hashem will forgive her. Why does the Torah create such an unusually lenient mechanism here? And again, the Torah closes the section with a seemingly redundant reminder. Eila hachukim asher tziva Hashem es Moshe. These are the chukim that Hashem commanded Moshe, bein ish leishto, between a man and his wife, ubein av levito. Why the need to highlight Hashem and his forgiveness in the Nedarim affair? Marriage can't survive if every statement becomes a battlefield. Frankly, sometimes people just say foolish things. Sometimes people speak from anger. Sometimes they create unnecessary obstacles. And it's at these moments where Shamshon Raphael Hirsch explains the Torah created mechanisms to preserve relationships rather than destroy them. Yeah, it happens that people speak out of term and seem to be headed to split off because of words that were offered in hot-headed times. Sometimes we just can get so angry at the people we care most about and expect to be on the same side of the coin as us, that when it seems we're not lining up right, we lose it. And we swear the people off to create space and distance and a Pollyannish view of independence. Well, Rav Hirsch explains that's not Ratzon Hashem. That's not the will of Hashem. Not in a marriage, not in a family. And so hence Hashem created the process of hafara. It's as if Hashem recognizes that he didn't want to force a wife to have to choose between her promise to him, to Hashem that is, and her marriage. No, says Hashem. The rules are that the husband shall annul, and then the marriage is, which is Yafik Ratzon Me Hashem, which is Hashem's desire, will endure. As far as the wife and her personal commitment to her promise to Hashem, Hashem yislach la, Hashem will forgive for the purpose of the greater good. These are the rules as set out by Hashem, who wants us all on the same side, bikiruv, close to one another, as we are all close to Him. And so resetting and reminding ourselves of our goals in a marriage, namely for Hashem, allows calmer heads to prevail and batim ne'emanim to flourish. Similarly, the daughters of Tzlafchad were not victims of tribal politics. The Torah says, they were first responsible to marry those whom they considered best. Their personal happiness mattered. Their preferences matter. That same sense of kiruv, of coming close, introduces both sides of the Benos Tzlafchad story. Both the women whom we were introduced to in last week's parsha and their cousins, the Bnei Gilad, in this week's parsha, begin their discussion with the concept of kiruv. In both instances, we find Vatikravna and Vayikravu, perhaps because they are not all adversarial parties litigating in a court. Make no mistake about it, the Benos Tzlafchad and the entire Bnei Gilad family had one intention in mind when discussing the different aspects of their problem: the fulfillment of Hashem's will, and how each of them could bring that about. And so together they shared a higher goal. How do we build our homes in a way that advances the mission that Hashem gave us? And because that was their first question, the second question became even easier. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh and Rav Hirsch both note that because of their desire to do the will of Hashem, they went first to their own shevet and found and ultimately did marry their best basheret, the ultimate partner, who would match with each one of the daughters according to her individual talents to create an environment of krevut, of closeness, where the Shekhinah would dwell among them. The Torah therefore only tells us Kasher Tziva Hashem Kein Hasu before telling us whom they married, because first came the mission, only afterwards came the match. Shared destination precedes shared address. In marriage, the question isn't, did I marry somebody exactly like me? The bigger question is, are we trying to build the same kind of home? Because two people with different personalities can build extraordinary marriages if they're working and building the same Mishkan. In business, partnerships fail less often because of differences in style than because of differences in mission. Yeah, one wants to build, the other wants to cash out, one wants to build something lasting, the other wants a quick exit, one values steady growth, the other aggressive expansion. Once purpose diverges, similarity becomes irrelevant. Communities rarely fracture because people disagree. Families rarely fracture because people disagree. You know when they fracture? They fracture when people stop believing that they're ultimately fighting for the same thing. Perhaps that's why both stories begin with the same word, Vayikravu Vatikravna. The families came close. The daughters of Slavchad came close. The litigants came close, not because they agreed, not because they were identical, not because they wanted exactly the same things. They came close because they shared a common destination. The Torah's vision of partnership was never that two people become the same person. The Torah's vision is that two different people walk towards the same Ribono Shel Olam. That's true in marriage. That's true in business. It's true in families. It's true in communities. And perhaps it's true of Klal Yisrael itself. After all, we are 12 very different tribes. And so therefore we have different personalities and different strengths and different callings and different ways of serving Hashem. But we surrounded one Mishkan, one Torah, and one destiny. Perhaps that's the final message of Sefer Bamidbar. Remember, the Sefer began with the tribes arranged around the Mishkan, and now it ends with the tribes learning how to remain tribes without becoming strangers. Because in Torah life, the question was never, are we alike? The real question has always been, are we traveling towards the same Har Hashem? And if we are, then even the oddest couples are actually not opposites at all. They're simply two travelers walking towards the same destination. And perhaps that's the final lesson of Sefer Bamidbar. Klal Yisrael was never asked to become one Shevet. We were asked to become one nation traveling towards one land, carrying one Torah in the service of the Ribono Shel Olam. Different strengths, different personalities, different paths, one destination. Because when the Jews walk towards Hashem together, they inevitably walk closer to one another as well. Wishing you and yours a Shabbat Shalom and a Shabbat Shalom to